We see a pro-Second Amendment bill get expedited all the way through becoming law here in California, while we also have several bills that are anti-Second Amendment that continue to work their way through the legislature. Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel today. That is right, it is worth getting a little bit of a status update from Sacramento and the way that the legislature is moving as we continue to see these bad bills live on in the process to become law here in California. To walk us through that today, we have brought back the legislative director for CRPA. You can also find him on the Firing Line Radio. You can catch that on AM 590 The Answer every Saturday at 1 p.m. That, of course, is Rick Travis. Rick, thank you for being on with us today.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. And guys, before we get into this, I won't spend too much time on it today. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps these videos get out as far and wide as possible. We're talking to the people who are working up in Sacramento. We're talking to the people who are writing and arguing lawsuits in the courts for California laws. We want to get this info out as far and wide as we can. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. So, Rick, before I bring you in really quick, let's just do a quick recap as Jacob brings up my notes for me here. Looks like we got about 6 bills that are still in play, and the reason why this is worth bringing up is because, first of all, we are going into a month-long recess, and I do want to talk to you, Rick, about that. Not necessarily the recess, but what it's going to look like coming back from the recess. And we also saw, I think, 4 or 5 of these bills in committee just a couple of days ago, but all of them over the last couple of weeks have seemed to continue and move forward. This, of course, I'm talking about Senate Bill 704. This is the one that would force Californians to register and do a background check for any purchase or transfer of firearm barrels. You've also got Assembly Bill 383. This one would ban the ownership of firearms for juveniles if they are convicted of a crime having to do with a firearm all the way up until the age of 30. So if you're talking about removing a voting block, this is a way that they're doing it for firearms. You've also got Assembly Bill 1127. That is the Glock ban bill. I know we've talked a lot about that one. Rick, I wanted to ask you about this one in a minute. Assembly Bill 1263, which was a spot bill now having to do with ghost guns. You've also got Assembly Bill 1078. This is the increase of regulations in regards to applying for a CCW in California. It's also the 3 gun a month rule after we just saw the DuncanVBonta case rule that 1 gun a month was illegal, which, by the way, they didn't state that it was I said illegal, I meant unconstitutional. They didn't rule it was unconstitutional because the number was 1. They said it was unconstitutional because it was limiting the constitutional right to keep and bear arms. So got to talk logically about how 3 guns a month would make any sense. Senate Bill 248 is the last one. This is essentially sending propaganda to new firearms owners here in the state. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bills that are bad, that are still in play, all of which over the last couple of weeks have been passed on to the Appropriations Committee. So, Rick, this is kind of where I wanted to bring you in. Before we get into the overall view, we do have Assembly Bill 1263. This is a newer one. It was a spot bill. Could you go ahead and let us know what exactly is this bill attacking and what are they saying it's going to do?
Well, 1263 was a spot bill early on. It is kind of morphed a couple times going through the process. But its amendments and things have made it a bill that is called simply Firearms, Ghost Guns. It's brought to us by Assemblymember Gibson. And what this bill would prohibit is a person from knowing or willfully causing another person to engage in the unlawful manufacture of firearms, or knowingly or willfully aiding, abetting, prompting, or facilitating the unlawful manufacture of firearms. And what this basically comes down is anybody wanting to use a 3D printer or a CNC machine, which is a milling machine, to make a firearm, to make firearm parts, to do anything like that. This is basically designed to stop anybody from making a part for a firearm that maybe the company doesn't exist anymore, or those parts are hard to come by for various reasons. They're in foreign countries where there's tariffs. There's lots of reasons for this. And people have always done this in American history, not with the CNC machine or a 3D printer. Obviously, those are newer technologies, but the whole concept of people being able to recreate parts for their firearms, to keep them safe, to improve them, to do things like that. That has been an American right since the founding of this country, and this seeks to take away that right.
Yeah, so definitely add that one to the list of bills that we are fighting against. It would infringe on Second Amendment rights. Therefore, we're going to be advocating against it. So, Rick, as we've gone along with the legislative process this year, I've really tried to highlight on this channel the steps that actually go into that process. I think it's a good way looking forward to continue and follow it, just because it really highlights all of the opportunities that we have to advocate. We're coming up here. All of these bills now sit in appropriations. We've already been to appropriations once, but as we saw, the appropriations process then feed into these bills switching houses and then continue to go through committees. Can you go ahead and remind us what exactly is the process here in the Appropriations Committee up in Sacramento?
Yeah, so there are two appropriations committees, as you kind of alluded to. One is in the Assembly, one is in the Senate. And what it is when bills have made it through policy committees, they go to appropriations where the members of that house look in that committee and say, yes, we have money in the state budget. And before everyone starts laughing out loud, that's this, we're just talking to principle here. And then say, yes, we have the money for this, and this would be a wise use of that money, and therefore we'll advance the bill to a floor where it'll be read 3 times and then voted on. If there are changes from when it left the House of Origin, so like the Assembly bill would be, the House of Origin would be the Assembly, and it's now went through its third reading and floor vote on the Senate, then it would go back for concurrence if there were some amendments made while it was in the Senate House. If not, then it goes straight to the governor's desk to either be signed into law or vetoed. What is unique is California, you might have heard, has a slight budget crisis. And so, depending on who you talk to, if it's Newsom running for president, which is now 24/7, Newsom tries to minimize that budget. The Office of Accounting within the legislation will tell you that it's a much bigger number. And there are people arguing also you have to play the correct way to do things, which would be like, Kevin, if I say currently we're $100 in debt, but next week we're going to end up with another $990. I don't say we're $50 in debt. I say we're going to be $1,000 in debt on August 1st, for in that example. So we have another 28 to $35 billion shortfall that hits us in January 1. We're currently already in the high, double digits, about to hit the $100 billion deficit mark, depending on who you talk to. So Newsom can sit there and say, oh, we're only like 30-ish billion. The government accounting office says, no, we're like 70-ish billion. But they also tell us we're going to have another possible 30 billion. So bottom line, we don't have the money for not just 2A, anti-2A stuff, but for a lot of things. And then as the Trump administration cuts continued funding, and you have the Dems on the far left wanting to save failed projects like the bullet train, they're trying to look where they could bleed off. And so all that to say, we saw this in round one of appropriations, Kevin. We saw where the Senate, which tends to be more conservative in finance, and I want to be very careful how I say that. I'm not talking about in values. I'm saying in finance. There were several bills that just died instantaneously. Authors went in front of Senate Appropriations and said, we're done. And the bill just died. In the Assembly, they were a little less frugal. So as I look at this, all these Assembly bills that are up like 1127, 1263 we just talked about, there is strong chances that if we're making the arguments, which we're doing, about the budget shortfall, that some of those bills could be stopped there. And then again, we have an opportunity at the governor's desk, which with the governor right now trying to peer, from everything from the Sean Ryan podcast to other things of being moderate to pro Second Amendment, which we all know is a farce and a lie, but he might actually veto a couple of these saying, you know what, this is a chance to show that I'm all about common sense budgeting, which we know nothing he does is common sense. However, on the horrible firearms barrel bill, which is Senate Bill 704, it's going to take a lot of public outcry to kill that bill because appropriations in the Assembly is a little bit easier hurdle than it is in the Senate. historically, and that seems to be true in round one, but we don't know what's going to come in round two. So I encourage everybody to continue to support us through One Click Politics, but it really helps our case up in the Capitol when you spread that around to your friends. So as you're clicking that One Click Politics and you're thinking, hey, I've got 3 or 4 people that I hang out with, wherever that may be, push it over to them and ask them to take a second to do it.
That's kind of why I really like the relationship that we have here. You're the one who gets the direct feedback from these legislators and their office, and it's very encouraging to have these conversations with you, knowing that that advocacy is making an impact. Guys, it's really easy to look at a couple of these bills and think, okay, there is some serious opportunity for money to be spent here. You're looking at Senate Bill 248. This would be the government creating a program to write and then print and then mail propagandized information to new gun owners. Definitely got a correlation to spending there. Also, the registration on firearm barrels that we've seen those processes before. We've seen the state completely, underestimate how much those things actually cost. Whether or not they're going to see that here, but we just saw the 400% increase in ammunition background checks because they weren't making enough money off of those background checks. So there is money that you can very logically tie into this. But the fact of the matter is, every single one of these bills requires a government program that's going to cost money. So hopefully that line of argumentation can be really effective as we continue to look at the budget crisis that we have here in California throughout this committee.
And Kevin, I think one of the things that we cannot let go by is the absolute absurdity of this, but it's just the reality we all live in. Obviously, any of these bills that make it to the governor's desk and are signed into law, we're going to have to adjudicate immediately, which costs all of us on this side of the aisle money twice. First, it costs us because the government is going to spend millions of dollars to say, no, we're okay in doing this, despite the fact that the Ninth Circuit, the most liberal appellate court in the country, is actually telling the state of California, you realize you keep losing. You keep losing on these arguments. Some of the most liberal judges appointed by people, going back to Jimmy Carter, there's still a couple of them on that court, but even people that have been appointed by Obama, Clinton, etc., Biden, are like, guys, stop. You keep losing these arguments, but they don't. They keep being arrogant and they keep pushing them. But those cases have literally cost taxpayers millions of dollars. And then it costs millions of dollars on our side. So we're actually paying for this twice. And that is why one-click politics is so important, because when you click those letters that we've pre-curated for you and those go to the Capitol, I hear it all the time from people on both sides of the aisle of, wow, that was a lot of okay, yeah, you got your people are upset. And our numbers are getting sufficient enough that we're outweighing the numbers of people supporting. And that's important because at the end of the day, politicians are always running for office, especially in the assembly. That's every other year. So, the joke, and it's not a joke, is when do you start your campaign? The day after the election. I start my re-election campaign. And so the more heat they feel, the more weary they become. And then when we at CRPA start publishing their voting records and things like that, yeah, some people are happy in their liberal communities, but a lot of people get really upset and start to say, how do I stop this? And what you offer in one-click politics is how you help stop it.
And of course, the luxury of being the one creating these campaigns, I can bring the stats for you. So, guys, we have had 75,000 connections from California citizens to their legislative representatives just in the last month. Primarily on these 6 bills that you see here. These campaigns are working. They're ramping up. We definitely need to, continue that throughout the end of the legislative session. And for that matter, next year and the year after that as well, it's certainly serving as a good tool for us to advocate legislatively.
If we could break 100,000, that would send a shockwave through Sacramento. And that is not an exaggeration. If we could break 100,000, that is going to roll a lot of people back on their feet. And for the naysayers out there, I would just point out that completely outside of the Second Amendment, we have multiple members of the legislature this week that are Democrats that did not vote with the Democrats for several key pieces of emergency legislation, said, no, we're not going to do it. They are breaking ranks And we need to put pressure on those people to continue that rank breakage because we're now able to stop the supermajority, folks. I've told you several times we're going to be able to do this. It's happening in real time. And how we keep pushing this is to get those numbers up. So please, please, please push this message far and wide.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about that. I guess for the time being, the Hawaiian shirts and the flip-flops are going to get busted out here really quick. Starting tomorrow, we do start the month-long legislative recess that the California legislature sees every summer. Can you go ahead and lay out the landscape of what it's going to be like when it comes back? As we've already stated, all of these bills are in the Appropriations Committee, whether that's the Senate or the Assembly Appropriations Committee. What does the timeline look like? When are going to be the opportunities to advocate, and what's that overall landscape look like coming back?
That's a great question. And normally I would have had a canned answer because for decades there was a canned answer. It no longer applies. So for those that don't know the canned answer would be Kevin. Everyone's on vacation, staff, everybody. I get to breathe. I get to actually go be a real person for a couple of weeks. That's not the case. So what has happened is staff has pretty much been bifurcated to two tasks. One is prepping for the 2026 elections. So you can look across the board, and while every staff member will probably take a week to go be with family, go to whatever amusement parks and stuff that normal people do on a vacation during the summer, the rest of that time will not be spent vacating around the world. That will be spent either, like I said, prepping for the elections, or what I'm already working with a lot of people and why I'm not going anywhere is because we are already working on bill language that will come out in the January part of the session. So that normally doesn't happen until December. It's happening now. Bills are being considered. Bills are being granted authorship by various legislators. So that's one thing. So we're not even out of this session, and technically the next session has already begun. And there's always a connection there, but it's much earlier in the swing of things. The second issue is when we come back, it may feel to a lot of people that this is much quicker. And I always point out, and Kevin, you and I talk about this offline, House of Origin bills, like an assembly bill, starts out in the assembly in January, usually by the second, third week. And we plod along through committees like public safety, judicial, etc. If it's a hunting bill, it may go through wildlife and parks. Those can take 4 months to get through that process. And then we have the deadline in May that moves the bill to the other house. And then it's very, very quick. We come back on August 18th, and we literally have 2 days of testimony on any given bill before it's being ejected out of appropriations down. And when I say 2 days, here's what I mean by that. Let's just take a bill in a hypothetical, 1263 that you brought up. It might go to appropriations. We say no, please no. And so everybody knows we don't get to go and actually physically testify. We're doing the same thing you are. I'm writing letters. I'm meeting with staff in the background. We're doing everything to kill it that way. Those bills will get read off, and certain ones will be placed in suspense in appropriations the first week back. The second week back, they'll roll them all out and vote them in, and there's absolutely no testimony. So the one-click politics is everything. When we come back, this is as fast and furious as it gets in the Capitol. And then it all goes to the governor's desk, and then it's us appealing to the governor and putting a lot of pressure on that office not to do it.
Is this like a timing thing? Should we be sending letters now, or should we wait until the break is over?
Send letters, build up, just keep sending, keep doing it, keep spreading, which is why I think there's more than enough time for people to push this message through their local gun stores, through the different groups they hang out with. And that's the other thing. We've got to get this community outside of our 2A centric bubble. And what I mean by that, just a gun store, the range, etc., and start talking to all the people we know that support, have guns, do things, get them involved. Get the people that maybe haven't bought a firearm but believe in the choice to exercise a constitutional right. Get them involved. We have to get everyone we know involved and put a lot of pressure because we need to build this momentum to take back California.
Well, definitely something that we are going to be paying attention to very closely. We're obviously going to follow along and see what the legislature does, but we are going to keep working in the background through the break all the way up until these bills get signed or not signed by the governor. And we're going to continue advocating against them that way. Don't necessarily, and thank you for bringing up the gun stores, by the way, because maybe this is something we're not always the best at, and that is celebrating the victories that we get. Oftentimes when you kill a bill, it's nice to kill a bill. What's even nicer is to get a bill through that you really wanted to support. And guys, if you didn't know, on a little bit of an accelerated process, we saw Assembly Bill 584 not just make it through after the House swap, but also already get signed by the governor. We have talked about this. I think, Rick, we talked about it right when the bill came out at the beginning of the year. Because that was so long ago, could you go ahead and refresh us? What is Assembly Bill 584? Why is this a big deal, especially for FFLs in the state? And how is it going to be applied to going forward now that it's law?
So it's very easy to look at Assembly Bill 584 and say, okay, that's really interesting, Rick. A bill got across, but what does it do for me? So I want to address it. Many of you have complained over the years, and rightfully so, that your local gun store basically went out of business, said they couldn't do it anymore. And the reason for that most often was because of the harassment they took from the California Department of Justice, where they were continually being fined. DOJ would tell you, well, because they're out of compliance. Well, let's just talk about just one of the compliance issues, which happened to be security doors. This sounds so stupid because it was. And what it was is that the penal code written back in this particular area in the mid 1980s said you had to have a door lock and bars on the windows of the door and all these things that made it very easy to put chains around and take a truck and rip the door right off and break in to get to the firearms. Many gun stores are in a mall, a strip mall that's owned by another person. They just rent the space. And so a lot of those people were tired of all these things happening in negative press. So a lot of times they just killed the lease and said goodbye. And that can destroy a business very rapidly. But what also happened in these scenarios was that DOJ, when they initially wrote off, yes, you can have your gun store here, would say, yeah, the penal code says you have to have this kind of door. But that same business had to also appease the fire chief and the fire code. And those two codes were out of alignment and have been since basically the late 80s, early 90s. So the deference was given to the fire department, and then Bonta became attorney general. Bonta started doing this weird crackdown patchwork, and people started getting fined. And, maybe if you're a bigger box store, even though they were very upset about this, you could weather that storm, but $5,000 fines can put a small business very quickly out of business. And landlords don't like to deal with this back and forth. And so, they switched the door out. Anyways, that gets passed down to all of us. We suffer at the end of that. So to me, this was a common sense fix. We ran it, we pushed it, we wrote it very tightly, and it became the first, what could be argued, 2A bill to be passed in our state government in decades, literally in decades, Kevin. And we were able to get it through. I think it's worthy to note that I think to our Democratic opponents, it was so well written by our lawyers and myself and the author's office, which a shout of praise goes out to Heather Hadwick, the Assemblywoman who carried this bill for us. That what happened was they didn't even want it discussed in committee. And as you know, Kevin, this got put on consent, which meant it was just pushed with a bunch of other things and say everybody in favor of everything on the consent, this hodgepodge of stuff, say aye, move through. When it got to the House floors, there was no debate, no discussion. It just got passed unanimously out of both houses because the Dems did not want to ever give us credit for showing that we were pro firearm safety and pro making the Second Amendment work correctly. So, a lot of things that we have said were proven. We were also told a lot of fables that you couldn't use a first-term assembly member to get a bill passed dealing with firearms or gun stores. Yeah, we blew that theory up. Got told we would never get this bill out of the first house, let alone the second house, and even if we did, the governor would not sign it. All those three fables have been put down. And the final one is I promised on this show to you, our board, and the people that I've went and met with, that we were going to start pushing legislation back. We weren't just going to be defensive. We were going to become offensive. And we have several other bills that are still in play that will come back up in January. We have other bills that are being introduced in January. So it is no longer the days of old where it's just bills coming at us. We're pushing bills back. and we're winning. So, yeah, we're very happy.
Well, good gosh darn. Thanks for firing me up. That makes me want to support you and what you're doing. And guys, here's the cool thing. I can do that, and so can you. This is the one-click politics campaigns that we're talking about. So be sure to be on the lookout for those as this legislative session, and as Rick just said, the next legislative session ends up coming around. Rick, I know you're a busy guy. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing all this with us today. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to be on the show and to thank the people that support us.
Absolutely. And guys, one more time, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. If you want to continue to see this content, if you want to see it grow, we're talking to the people who are working up in the legislature. We're talking to the people who are writing and arguing these lawsuits in court. It's a great way for you to directly contribute to those efforts for the Second Amendment here in California. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you on the next one.